She should have been grateful. He left her with a child and no debt. That's what they said when Oliver Moore's body was never found. But the dead don't buy mansions. The dead don't change their names. And the dead don't stroll through malls with new families. When Skylar saw him that day, she didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply watched. Because there's a quiet kind of revenge, the kind that starts with silence and ends with the world finally seeing the truth. Stay with us. Because what begins as a tragedy ends in revelation. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever mourned someone only to discover they were never really gone? The night it happened still lived in her, not as memory, but as echo. Rain lashed the windshield so hard the wipers couldn't keep up, slicing the night into frantic flashes of light and shadow. Skylar's voice had already gone hoarse from pleading. "Oliver, please slow down." But he didn't. His hands gripped the wheel tight, knuckles pale against the black leather. The road ahead blurred into silver ribbons under the storm. Thunder rolled low, like an argument between gods. They'd fought before, but never like this. Tonight, the words had been heavier, sharper, about bills, late payments, a company collapsing faster than he could fix it. He'd accused her of losing faith. She'd accused him of giving you Paige. Between them sat the kind of silence that hurt worse than shouting. When he finally spoke again, his voice broke something inside her. "You'll be better off without me." She turned toward him, tears streaking her cheeks, the baby's soft cries muffled from the back seat. "Don't you dare say that." But he only pressed harder on the gas, the speedometer needle climbing as the bridge loomed ahead, slick with rain. Headlights from the opposite lane glared like accusations, and then a flash of metal, a skid, the sickening sound of tires losing grip. Skylar screamed his name as the car broke through the guardrail. Cold, black, weightless. The world spun into silence beneath the water's surface. She remembered reaching, for him, for air, for anything solid. But the seatbelt jammed. A hand brushed hers once, desperate, then gone. When she woke up hours later in the hospital, everything was white and wrong. They told her she'd been pulled from the river by a passerby. They told her the car was found. They told her Oliver wasn't. Days bled into weeks, each one emptier than the last. Divers searched the river for a body that never surfaced. The funeral came without a casket. She stood under another gray sky, holding Ava in her arms, staring at the framed photo of a man who was both everywhere and nowhere. The whispers of pity burned worse than the rain. Widow at 28. Single mother. Tragic love story. But Skylar knew better. It wasn't tragedy. It was unfinished business, a wound that never scabbed. Every night she heard the echo of his voice through the storm. Every morning she woke up half expecting the door to open. But it never did. The world said he was gone. Only Skylar knew the truth. Something about that night never felt like an ending. 2 years later, the rain still sounded the same. It beat softly against the glass of her small Miami apartment, a rhythm she had grown to live by. Steady, distant, safe. Outside, the city pulsed with color and noise. Music spilling from corner cafes, laughter echoing off the bay, the hum of traffic that never truly stopped. But inside, Skylar Moore's world moved in slow motion. She woke before dawn, packed lunches for the daycare, ironed her scrubs, and tied her hair into a low bun with the precision of someone afraid to leave anything undone. Routines were her armor. They kept her from falling into the places memory could still reach. At St. Jude's Hospital, she was known as the calm one, the nurse who never raised her voice, who remembered every name and every allergy, who sat beside patients long after visiting hours ended. Her eyes were warm, but distant. The younger nurses whispered about her sometimes, curious about the quiet woman who never mentioned a husband, who never wore a ring, They didn't know the name Oliver Moore. She rarely spoke it herself. It lived in her like a secret she was both keeping and trying to forget. Each year, on the anniversary of the crash, Skylar drove to the bridge. She parked by the guardrail, the one patched with new steel and weathered flowers, and she placed a single white lily at the edge. She always stood for a while, never long, just enough to listen to the wind rush over the water. "You can rest now," she would whisper, though she wasn't sure which of them she was talking to. But this year felt different. The air hung heavy, charged with something unnamed. The river moved slower, almost watchful. She shivered and pressed her palm to the cold metal rail. "I hope you found peace," she said, but the words caught like sandpaper in her throat. Later that evening, her best friend Layla showed up with Thai takeout and the same weary advice. "You can't keep visiting ghosts, Sky," she said, curling up on the couch beside her. "It's time to live again." Skylar smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "I'm trying," she said, and maybe she meant it. But when the city lights dimmed and Ava's soft breathing filled the apartment, she sat by the window staring at the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, the ocean met the sky. The same sky that had swallowed her husband whole. And for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel closure. She felt a pulse, a tremor in her chest, whispering that something wasn't over. Saturday mornings had become Skylar's small rebellion against routine, the one day she let herself slow down. The Coral Springs Mall was crowded, buzzing with life, filled with everything her own days lacked: noise, color, laughter. Ava's hand was warm in hers as they walked past the carousel, her tiny braids bouncing with each skip. "Ice cream first," Skylar said, smiling when her daughter squealed in agreement. For a moment, it felt simple again, just mother and child, sunlight streaming through the glass ceiling, the air thick with the smell of roasted almonds and fresh pretzels. They reached the ice cream counter, the kind painted in cheerful pastels that never faded, no matter the season. Ava pressed her nose against the glass. "Chocolate swirl," she declared with the seriousness of a diplomat. Skylar laughed, ordered 2 cones, and paid without looking at her phone, a rare thing. Maybe, she thought, this was what healing looked like. Quiet days, small joys, life moving forward, even if her heart hadn't. Then she turned, and the world stopped. Across the atrium, a man pushed a stroller toward the fountain, his laugh rising above the noise like a sound she hadn't heard in years but would have recognized anywhere. The tilt of his head, the slope of his shoulders, it was impossible. She blinked once, twice, breath caught halfway in her throat. The man bent to fix a child's shoe, sunlight catching a faint scar near his temple. Her knees went weak. That scar, that voice, that walk. Oliver. Her first instinct was denial. Her heart thrashed in her chest as her mind scrambled for logic. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But then he looked up, smiling at the woman beside him, a tall, elegant Latina with dark waves and gold hoops that glinted in the light. Her hand rested on his arm, familiar, intimate. 2 children, 1 boy, 1 girl, ran circles around the stroller, their laughter echoing. "Daddy, look! Daddy!" The word hit like a slap. Skylar's vision blurred, the ice cream melting over her knuckles, dripping down her wrist. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man she had buried 2 years ago, whose photo still sat on her nightstand, was standing 20 feet away, alive, smiling, holding another woman's hand. Ava tugged her sleeve. "Mommy?" she whispered, eyes wide. Skylar blinked back tears, forcing her voice steady. "Eat your ice cream, baby." But her gaze never left him. Her pulse roared in her ears. Because whatever that was, ghost, dream, lie, It had just rewritten everything she thought she knew about loss. Her knees nearly gave out, and she caught herself against the nearest column, the cold marble pressing into her palm. Her breath came shallow, unsteady, each inhale scraping against disbelief. The mall's noise blurred into a distant hum. Children laughing, music playing from a store window, all of it swallowed by the sight before her. Oliver bent down to lift a little girl into his arms, her small hands clutching his face as she giggled. He looked older, the way grief might have aged him if he'd truly lived through it. Except he wasn't supposed to have. He was supposed to be gone. Skylar ducked behind the column, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed to run, but her body refused to move. The scent of his cologne seemed to drift across the air, that familiar mix of cedar and clean linen that had once lingered on their sheets. Her eyes burned. The memories came fast, uninvited. The first time she met him, at a charity gala neither of them wanted to attend. He'd spilled champagne on her dress and made her laugh before she could be angry. He'd looked at her like she was the only steady thing in a spinning room. Within months, they were inseparable. She could still feel the rush of that early love, the kind that felt invincible. The nights they danced barefoot in their kitchen, the smell of rain on the porch as he whispered plans for their future. "You and me against the world, Sky," he used to say, always. Their wedding had been small but perfect, the two of them laughing under a string of lights as if forever was guaranteed. And then came the unraveling, the business deals that turned to debts, the phone calls she wasn't supposed to hear, the arguments that left both of them raw. Even then, she had believed in him, in the man who promised he'd never walk away, until the night he did, until the crash. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to look again. Oliver, no, the man who used to be Oliver, stood now at a toy kiosk, helping the little boy pick out a train set. His new partner leaned into him, whispering something that made him laugh. That laugh, the same one that used to light up her mornings, tore something open inside her. Skylar pressed a trembling hand to her chest, fighting the wave rising inside her. 2 years of grief, of prayers whispered into emptiness, and here he was, alive, happy. Building a new life like theirs had never existed. And for the first time since the river took him, Skylar wondered if the real death had been hers. She moved without thinking, her feet tracing the rhythm of disbelief. Each step echoed faintly against the marble floor as she followed them from a distance, past the fountain, through the food court, into the wing lined with boutiques that shimmered with polished glass and fluorescent light. Her pulse drummed in her ears. The stroller wheels squeaked faintly. The boy clung to Oliver's leg. The little girl pointed at something in a shop window. Everything about the moment was ordinary, painfully ordinary, and yet Skylar felt like the world had slipped its axis. He walked the same way he always had. A half-confident stride, shoulders relaxed, hand tucked into his pocket when he wasn't holding the woman's. His voice carried faintly over the chatter, that same low timbre that used to anchor her through the worst nights. Skylar's fingers trembled around the half-melted cone still clutched in her hand. She wanted to call out, to run to him, to demand why the world had buried her alive for 2 years while he built another life. But fear pinned her in place. What if it wasn't him? What if grief had warped her memory into this cruel mirage? And worse, what if it was him, and he looked at her with blank, unrecognizing eyes? She ducked behind a rack of handbags, peering between the display stands like someone caught between sanity and illusion. The woman beside him, poised, graceful, her skin warm bronze beneath soft curls, leaned close to whisper something. Oliver smiled, then bent to kiss her forehead with the ease of habit. Something splintered inside Skylar. Not rage, not even betrayal, but the quiet devastation of realizing she had mourned a man who had chosen to disappear. For 2 years, she'd blamed fate. Now, fate looked a lot like free will. Ava tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, confusion clouding her bright eyes. "Why are we hiding?" Skylar blinked, forcing herself to kneel. "We're not, sweetheart. Mommy's just looking for something." Her voice wavered, barely a breath. Ava studied her face, then frowned. "Are you crying?" Skylar swallowed hard, brushing a tear before it fell. "No, baby," she said softly. "Mommy's just tired." She gathered her daughter into her arms, the weight grounding her even as the world around her spun. When she looked back toward the crowd, they were gone, swallowed by the flow of people and color. Only the echo of his laugh remained, lingering in the air like a ghost she could almost touch. And as she stood there beneath the bright, indifferent lights, Skylar realized the nightmare wasn't that she'd lost him. It was that he'd chosen to live as if she never existed. The night stretched long and sleepless, the kind where every tick of the clock sounded like a warning. Skylar sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by stacks of papers that smelled faintly of dust and old grief. Insurance forms, police reports, the death certificate with his name typed in neat black ink. Oliver James Moore, cause of death, presumed drowning. She traced the letters with her fingertip, feeling the faint indentation of the pen where she'd signed her name as next of kin. Proof, they'd called it. Closure. But the image of him standing in that mall burned through every page like fire. She spread the documents across the coffee table, her hands trembling. Every detail she had been told was supposed to make sense. The missing body, the car submerged for days, the current that carried him away. But the scar on his temple wasn't something a stranger could fake. Neither was the way he cradled that child, gentle and sure. The same way he once held Ava when she was only days old. Skylar pressed her palms to her eyes, her breath shuddering. "You can't fake the way someone loves," she whispered into the quiet. By dawn, her resolve hardened. If the truth had been buried, she would dig it up herself. She dressed in the same uniform she wore the day of the funeral, black jeans, gray sweater, hair pulled tight, as if she needed armor just to walk back into the past. Detective Raines hadn't changed much. The same weary eyes, the same coffee-stained tie. When she walked into his office, he blinked like he was seeing a ghost. "Mrs. Moore," he said slowly, standing. "It's been a while." "I saw him," Skylar said. Her voice didn't tremble this time. "At Coral Springs Mall. He was alive." Raines studied her for a long moment before sinking into his chair. "You're sure?" She nodded, sliding the photo from her purse, a blurry shot she'd managed to snap before they vanished. He took it, leaning closer, squinting. When he looked up, something in his expression had changed. "The car went off the bridge, yes," he said quietly, "but no one saw the impact. We found tire marks, debris. No body, no footprints. I told my captain it didn't add up, but..." He sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Bodies don't just disappear." He looked up at her, voice lowering, "unless someone wants them to." Skylar stared at him, the chill settling deep. The river hadn't taken her husband. Something, or someone, had helped him vanish. 3 days passed, each one slower than the last. Skylar moved through them in fragments, pouring coffee she didn't drink, answering questions at work she didn't hear. The image of Oliver's face haunted her like a song stuck on repeat. She had convinced herself it might have been grief's trick, a cruel hallucination born from years of sleepless nights. But when night came, and the apartment was silent except for Ava's breathing, logic broke down. She knew what she'd seen, and she knew she couldn't let it go. Saturday afternoon, she found herself back at Coral Springs Mall, the same ice cream stand, the same carousel lights spinning gold against the polished floors. She didn't bring Ava this time. Her heart couldn't bear that kind of confusion twice. She waited by the fountain, pretending to scroll through her phone, her pulse thudding in her ears. Hours passed, and then she saw them. The stroller, the little boy running ahead, the woman's hand resting casually on his arm. Her chest tightened. There was no mistake. This time, she didn't hide. She followed. Carefully, past the shops and into the parking garage where the air smelled of oil and heat. The woman clicked the key fob of a sleek black Mercedes SUV. Skylar crouched behind a pillar, watching Oliver open the door for her, load the stroller, then climb into the passenger seat like a man perfectly at home. The engine purred to life. Skylar's shaking fingers lifted her phone. She snapped a photo of the license plate. That night she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the image until the numbers blurred. It didn't take long for a friend of Layla's, a paralegal with quiet favors owed, to trace it. The text came at midnight. Registered to Elias Grant, residence 317 East Laurel Drive. A name she'd never heard. Elias Grant. She whispered it out loud, the syllables foreign and wrong. Her stomach turned as she opened the satellite view of the address, a sprawling home tucked behind manicured hedges in an upscale Miami neighborhood, complete with a pool and a marble driveway. She zoomed in, the pale roof glinting beneath the Florida sun. He was living like nothing had happened, like she and Ava hadn't spent 2 years clawing their way out of debt, selling jewelry to pay rent, taking double shifts to keep the lights on. Skylar's throat ached with something between fury and disbelief. He hadn't died. He'd walked away, into a new name, a new life, and a world she'd been left too broken to imagine existed. The next morning, Skylar sat across from a man who smelled faintly of cigarettes and rain. His name was Rick Donnelly, a private investigator with eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. His office was cluttered with old case files, coffee-stained folders, and a single flickering desk lamp that hummed softly in the silence between them. Skylar's hands stayed folded in her lap, the same way they did when she was trying not to tremble. "I need to know everything," she said, her voice steady but thin around the edges. "About the man registered as Elias Grant." Rick studied her for a long moment before opening a folder thick with photographs and printouts. "You sure you're ready for that?" he asked. She didn't answer. He slid a photo across the table, Oliver standing beside the woman Skylar had seen, smiling for a newspaper shot at a charity gala. The caption read, "Elias and Isabella Grant of the Navarro Foundation." Her breath caught. Isabella Navarro. Skylar remembered the name from Miami's social pages. A philanthropist, widow of a shipping magnate worth millions. Oliver's arm was around her waist, his suit crisp, his smile easy. The same smile he used to give her before a deal went through. Rick continued, flipping through documents with methodical detachment. "Your husband's company went under 2 years ago. Heavy losses. SEC was circling him for securities fraud, insider trading, falsified accounts. Then the crash happened. Or rather, was staged. No witnesses, no body. 2 weeks later, large withdrawals were made from offshore accounts connected to a shell company under a new name. Elias Grant." Skylar's stomach churned. "So he didn't die. He ran." Rick nodded. "He ran and remarried. Isabella Navarro lost her husband around the same time. Convenient timing, if you ask me. Her fortune rebuilt his. He's got 2 stepkids now, a mansion, new business holdings under her foundation. He kept it clean this time. All in her name." Her heart thudded dully. Every image that once gave her comfort now twisted into a lie. Their wedding, his promises, his final words. "You'll be better off without me." Rick leaned back, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. "He's not missing, Mrs. Moore," he said quietly. "He's hiding." The words landed like a final blow. Skylar stared at the photo, at the man she once loved, and felt something inside her go still. It wasn't grief anymore. It was revelation, sharp and cold, the kind that didn't just close a chapter, it rewrote the entire story. The night was heavy with thunder, the kind that seemed to roll straight through the bones. Skylar parked across the street, her car engine ticking softly in the humid air. The mansion loomed ahead, white stone, glass walls, the faint shimmer of chandeliers flickering behind gauzy curtains. She sat in silence, rain beginning to fall in slow, deliberate drops against the windshield. The sound was too familiar. It took her back to the bridge, to the crash, to the moment her world split in two. And there, through the storm-streaked glass, was the man who had left her on one side of it. Oliver moved through the house with the ease of someone who belonged. She could see him clearly through the wide front windows, his shirt sleeves rolled, his hair damp from a shower, that familiar half-smile lighting his face as he lifted the little girl into bed. She watched him lean down, tuck the blanket beneath her chin, brush her forehead with a kiss. The same tenderness he once gave to Ava. It was unbearable in its simplicity. The warmth of that domestic scene, the golden light, the laughter she couldn't hear, burned through her chest like acid. Skylar's fingers curled tighter around the steering wheel until her knuckles turned bone white. The rain intensified, tapping harder, faster, as if the sky itself couldn't contain her fury. 2 years of grief. 2 years of loneliness. 2 years of raising a daughter who still asked when Daddy would come back. And all this time he'd been here, smiling, safe, alive. She could have walked up that driveway, banged on the door, demanded the truth he'd buried with his lies. She could have shattered his perfect illusion in front of his new family. But she didn't move. The storm inside her shifted, from rage to something heavier, more dangerous. Dignity, the kind that refused to let him take one more piece of her peace. Skylar exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the glass. "You don't get to break me twice," she whispered. Lightning flashed, illuminating the curve of his face, the faint scar that once felt like hers to trace. Then he turned off the light, the house sinking into quiet darkness. Skylar sat there for a long time after, letting the rain wash over the hood of her car, letting the ache settle into something cleaner. Resolve. When she finally started the engine, her reflection in the rearview mirror didn't look like the woman who'd lost everything. She looked like someone ready to reclaim it. The ballroom shimmered in gold, the kind of opulence that smelled of old money and polished lies. Skylar adjusted her volunteer badge and smoothed the black dress she'd borrowed from Layla, her pulse steady beneath the calm she'd practiced in the mirror. The Navarro Foundation's annual charity gala had drawn Miami's elite. Bankers, politicians, influencers, all gathered beneath crystal chandeliers and champagne dreams. She moved through the crowd with quiet precision, a tray of glasses balanced in her hand, her eyes scanning for the man who'd once sworn she was his world. Oliver, or Elias Grant, arrived late, as if the room had been waiting for him. His tuxedo was perfectly cut, his hair silvered just enough to look dignified. The photographers swarmed him and Isabella as they entered, her hand looped through his arm, her gown shimmering like liquid gold. The crowd adored them, the perfect power couple. But when his eyes found Skylar across the room, everything inside that perfection cracked. His smile faltered, his hand slipped, the color drained from his face. Skylar didn't look away. She set the tray down with measured grace, the kind that came from years of holding herself together when everything else fell apart. The distance between them vanished in slow motion. When he reached her, the noise of the gala faded until all that existed was the ghost of a marriage resurrected in the wrong room. "You weren't supposed to see this," he whispered, his voice fraying at the edges. She held his gaze, her tone soft but merciless. "I buried you." Cameras flashed. A few heads turned, curious. Isabella noticed first, her smile tightening as her husband's past took shape before her eyes. "Elias?" she asked, confusion laced with dawning fear. Reporters shifted, sensing blood in the water. Oliver's composure slipped entirely. "Skylar, please." "Not here." "Where then?" she said quietly. "At the bridge where you left me? At the grave I cried over for 2 years? Tell me where the truth fits in your schedule." The room fell still. The whispers began. First one, then many. Names, questions, disbelief. Someone's phone camera caught the moment, freezing it forever. The widow confronting her living husband beneath a chandelier that suddenly seemed too bright. Isabella stepped back, her eyes wide with horror. And in that flash of silence, the lie unraveled. The man who had built a new life on the ashes of an old one stood exposed before the world, his own ghost come to claim him. By morning, the story had consumed every screen in Miami. Headlines screamed in bold letters. "The Resurrection Scam. Businessman fakes death, builds fortune under new identity." Cable news ran the footage on repeat, the camera freezing on the moment Skylar's words landed like a verdict. "I buried you." Reporters dissected every frame, every glance, every tremor in Oliver's expression. Social media turned ruthless. Hashtags trended worldwide. Elias Grant exposed, and "The Widow Who Knew" filled the feeds. In the span of 12 hours, the empire he had rebuilt on deception began to crumble. Bank accounts were frozen, contracts dissolved. Isabella Navarro, once his silent partner and unsuspecting savior, vanished behind her lawyer's walls. Her legal team released a statement by dawn. "Mrs. Navarro has terminated all association with Mr. Elias Grant following revelations of identity, fraud, and financial misconduct." In other words, she was cutting him loose to save her fortune. The mansion Skylar had once stared at from across the street was suddenly guarded, the gates locked not against the world, but against him. Skylar watched it unfold from her apartment, her phone buzzing nonstop with messages from journalists, former co-workers, even strangers thanking her for her composure. She turned it face down on the counter. There was no satisfaction in watching him fall. Just a strange, hollow quiet. For 2 years, she'd lived inside a wound. Now that it was open to the world, she didn't feel healed, only empty. By noon, a press conference was arranged outside the courthouse. Cameras swarmed like vultures. Skylar stood at the podium in a simple black blouse, her hair pulled back, no makeup except the soft sheen of calm across her skin. The questions came rapid and sharp. "Mrs. Moore, what do you want to say to your husband? Do you plan to press charges? Did you know about the fraud?" She looked straight ahead, voice steady. "Sometimes the dead return, not for redemption, but for exposure." The crowd went still. The statement was clipped, elegant, final. It spread across networks within minutes, quoted by anchors, printed in headlines. She didn't linger for applause, but it came anyway. Soft at first, then louder, rising like rain on glass. As she stepped away from the podium, flashes erupted, but Skylar didn't flinch. She had already stood through a storm far worse. And as the cameras chased her down the courthouse steps, she didn't look back once. Some resurrections she knew weren't meant to save. They were meant to reveal. The river looked softer now. The water that once swallowed everything she loved shimmered in the late afternoon sun, rippling like glass beneath a pale blue sky. Skylar sat on the same patch of grass where she had once knelt in tears, clutching a bouquet that felt heavier than grief itself. Now, months later, her hands were empty except for a single white lily. The air was quiet, warm, alive. Beside her, Ava played with smooth stones, her laughter carrying faintly on the breeze, a sound that no longer felt haunted. The world had moved on from the scandal, as it always does. The headlines faded, the outrage cooled, and the man once known as Elias Grant had become another cautionary tale about greed and deceit. She didn't follow the aftermath. She didn't need to. She had learned that justice and peace weren't the same thing. One was loud, public, fleeting. The other, the kind she'd found, was silent and steady, like the current of the river before her. Sometimes she still thought of him, not with anger, not even sorrow, but with the detached compassion one feels for a stranger glimpsed across a crowded room. The man she'd loved had died long before the crash. The person who faked his death was someone else entirely. What she mourned now wasn't him. It was the version of herself who had once believed love could survive betrayal. But she had let that woman rest, too. She knelt and placed the lily on the surface of the water. It drifted gently, carried by the same current that had once taken him away. "This one's not for you," she murmured, her voice soft, certain. "It's for me." The wind lifted her words and scattered them like petals. For the first time in 2 years, her chest didn't ache. The silence didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt like space. Ava ran up behind her, arms full of wildflowers. "Mommy, look," she said, proud, radiant, alive. Skylar smiled, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's face. "They're beautiful," she whispered, pulling her close. Together they sat at the edge of the water, the past reflected in the calm surface but no longer pulling her under. The camera would have lingered there, on the woman who found peace not through vengeance but through release. The sun dipped lower, gilding her reflection in gold. Skylar Moore had lost a husband, but she'd found herself, and that was the truest resurrection of all. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there still mistakes survival for strength, not realizing that peace is the real victory. Skylar didn't rise to ruin him. She rose to reclaim herself. Because some resurrections aren't about revenge, they're about release. Comment below if you've ever had to make peace with the truth and walk away with grace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.